Welcome to The Shift Show with Adriana Bucci. Join me every week to learn all about narcissistic abuse recovery, healing from physical and emotional pain after the abuse, and everything else to do with toxic people and how they affect your physical, emotional, and mental health. And no, you are not the crazy one. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Let's get right to it. Welcome back to episode 2 of The Shift Show. As you probably gathered from the title of this episode, this is going to be all about how to identify a narcissist. Now, this counts for anybody in your life who you may suspect is a narcissist. This could be a family member, a parent, a friend, a significant other, a coworker, a manager, anybody. This list could be for any type of narcissist, and it doesn't have to be any specific relationship with the other person. Now, before I start this list, I wanted to just let you know not to panic if you see any of these traits in yourself. Because if you are able to see this trait in yourself and wonder if you're a narcissist, that already means that you are not a narcissist. We're all human. We all have traits that are not great. We all have great traits too. We all sometimes engage in toxic behavior, but it's when this toxic behavior is constant and affects other people around us and we literally don't care about how it affects the other people around us, then that would be the indication that you might be a narcissist. But I would imagine that if you're listening to this, you're not a narcissist, so please don't panic or worry that you might be a narcissist if some of this you can identify with. I will have an episode in the future about why you're probably not a narcissist, because a lot of people who have undergone narcissistic abuse, especially in their childhood, they tend to adopt these traits because they don't know better if their parents are narcissists, but it does not automatically make you a narcissist. So there will be an episode on that in the future, so stay tuned. But for now, here are the signs. Now, these signs are not a complete list, because if I did do a complete list of signs, this would be a 5-hour-long episode. So these are the main signs, and I'll add a few examples with some of the signs just so you can have it relate to your life. And the main thing to take into consideration with these signs are that if this is a constant behavior in the other person that you think is a narcissist, if they're constantly acting like this, they're constantly invalidating you, they're constantly gaslighting you when you try to call them out on their behavior, then yes, it is safe to assume that that person's a narcissist. Another thing to keep in mind is that a narcissist will never, ever go to a doctor or psychiatrist or psychologist to get diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, because they are incapable of even looking at themselves and thinking that they might be wrong, or that, the way that they treat other people might not be the best, because they are only capable of thinking about themselves and what serves them. They don't care about how they make other people feel. They don't care at all. So to get a narcissist to even step foot in a doctor's office about this is just not going to happen. And if it does happen, then chances are that that person's not a narcissist if they're actually willing to change, if they're actually willing to admit fault. So just bear that in mind when you hear about these signs. And here we go. Let's get started without further ado. So the first sign would be that they never take responsibility for their actions. So a narcissist will either conveniently forget that they did something awful, or they will tell you that you're the one who misinterpreted whatever they did or said. You are the crazy one. And this is called gaslighting. When a narcissist clearly did or said something to upset you, and you call them out on it, and then they make you feel crazy for calling them out on it. For example, a narcissist tells you that the sky is red, and you tell them, no, the sky is obviously blue. They will literally argue with you and tell you that you're colorblind, you're crazy, you're losing your mind, you have no idea what you're talking about, the schools that you went to for kindergarten were wrong, And they might even make up the fact that there's new schools now that teach the correct colors and it's actually red. So I know this sounds a little bit ridiculous, but they will defend themselves no matter how ridiculous they sound or are being. And especially when it comes to them doing something wrong to you. So if they called you a name, if they called you an idiot, for example, and you ask them, why did you call me an idiot? That was super rude. They will either say that because you are an idiot and you're just stupid and you have to accept that and they're not doing anything wrong by calling you an idiot, or they'll just completely deny it and say that you misheard them and you're going crazy. And this might actually make you feel like you are going crazy, and that's completely normal. Anyone would feel like they're going crazy when they're sure that they heard or saw something, but this other person is telling them that that didn't actually happen. Another sign is that the narcissist needs to be the center of attention at all times. Everything is always about them. Anything that suggests otherwise will set them off into a narcissistic rage. So, for example, if it's your birthday, they will potentially ruin your birthday. This is super common with children of narcissistic parents, where the parent makes the child's birthday about themselves and not so much about the child. So it's all about the sacrifices that the parents made, the labor story that the parent went through. They can just make it about themselves, or they can burst the child's bubble for being excited about their birthday and turn it into something about themselves and saying like, oh, well, you're being really annoying right now and we're going to cancel your birthday party if you continue being happy about it. That's just how narcissists function. And a narcissistic rage would be when a narcissist just gets completely triggered and set off by something that they know is something that you're calling them out on, but they want to be right so badly that they get filled with rage and angry. So they might start shouting, screaming. There's times when they can resort to physical violence, and if that does happen, I would highly recommend you get some legal help and get the police involved, because that's a completely different story. And yeah, they pretty much always have to be the center of attention, and if they're not the center of attention, they will go into a rage, or they will just be super pouty and they'll just be ridiculous about it. Another sign is an excessive need and desire for control. This also ties into everything being all about them. So a narcissist needs to be in control about everything, because if they're not in control, then they perceive that as a threat to their ego, pretty much. Another sign is that they are very dishonest and manipulative. You can catch a narcissist in a lie and they will manipulate their way out of it. They just lie or bend the truth to suit their needs. Another sign is that they cannot take any criticism, but they can sure dish it. If you're doing something incorrectly, for example, I don't know, a ridiculous example would be unloading a dishwasher the wrong way. There's no wrong way to unload a dishwasher. You take the stuff out, you put it back where it belongs, but a narcissist can find a fault in the way that you do this. And you will hear all about it and about how stupid you are for unloading the dishwasher the wrong way, and they just don't care. But when they're clearly doing something the wrong way, like, I don't know, being rude to you or being mean or calling you names, and you end up calling them out on it, then they will explode and throw it back in your face, and they'll probably say, how could you do this to me? How could you do this to me is a very common line that they like to use when you call them out on it, because it transfers the guilt onto you. Instead of them feeling bad about whatever they did, they try to make you feel bad for being right, essentially. Another sign is that they're jealous of others. They might not show this outright, but you'll see it in subtle signs. For example, they might criticize the person that they're jealous of, or they might purchase the same types of things as that person has in order to compete with that person, whether or not that other person is even aware of it or cares. Another thing about narcissists is that everything is a competition with them. Narcissists compete with everything. These competitions range from absolutely ridiculous things to brag about to normal things that nobody really needs to brag about. They just make anything into a competition. For example, and this one's going to be a really ridiculous example, and I like to use ridiculous examples because I feel like it just generalizes it, and you can apply this to any example that you have in your own life. So, for example, if you're cutting vegetables, they will basically tell you that they won a championship for cutting vegetables the best. Or another example would be, their child is the best in math. Their baby said their first word at 2 months old and grew their first tooth before any of the other stupid babies did. Like, anything that they have or are capable of or whatever is a competition. Their own children are a competition. They view their children as an extension of themselves. So anything that the child does, they take it personally as a reflection of themselves, which is true to an extent, but they basically put this job on the child to be a miniature version of them. And I will do a future episode about narcissistic parents. Another example would be they have the best Christmas tree, it has the best lights. They almost invented the best toothbrush ever, but somebody else stole their idea, and now they're thinking of suing this person who has never met them before. Just absolutely ridiculous things, and everything's a competition. The other thing that they compete with is that everything that goes wrong in their life is also a competition. So if they have a headache and you have a migraine, their headache is worse than your migraine. If your pet died, they turn it into a story about how their goldfish died when they were 5 years old, and they just completely invalidate what you went through, even though what you went through is probably worse than whatever BS the narcissist is either making up or is way in the past or isn't even relevant to what you're talking about. They just have to make everything about themselves and a competition. If you're sick with a cold, they'll tell you about the time when they had a cold and they almost died from it because their cold was special and worse. They went to the hospital so many times this year because they're so much sicker than anyone else. Their ex-spouse is the worst person ever. In fact, all of their exes are crazy and responsible for their relationship ending, and the narcissist had no part in the breakup, and they're just an innocent victim, and this would be something that they would tell you when you tell them about a breakup or anything like that. They always have it worse than anything that you're telling them, and they just somehow make the whole thing about them. This ties into the next sign where they always play the victim. And this is pretty much a slap in the face to, actual victims of crimes or injustices or, emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse. And anything that goes wrong in the narcissist's life is never their fault. And they love to stay the victim and play the victim even when they're not. Because most of the time they're actually the perpetrator. So the example I had before, that their ex-spouse or ex-partner is the worst person ever and all of their exes are crazy and responsible for the relationship ending, well, you're never going to hear about when they were emotionally abusing and destroying the other person on an emotional and mental level. You'll never hear about that. And when that person finally gets fed up and leaves them, that makes them the victim. So they got dumped by this person when it really, this person was just sticking up for themselves because of the abuse that the narcissist was putting them through. So this is how the narcissist puts themselves in victim mode on purpose, and it's in order to garner sympathy or attention from other people. They will also continue to tell the story of when they were a victim over and over and over for decades. They'll keep telling that same story about their ex-spouse 30 years later when it's not even relevant anymore in order to get sympathy from other people. And they just never let go of these things. And they're really, in reality, not even victims of these things. Another sign is a grandiose sense of self-importance. Narcissists think that they're extremely important. Grandiosity is defined as the quality of being impressive and imposing in appearance or style, especially pretentiously so. So imagine this is how they feel about themselves. This is more than just being arrogant or vain. They believe that they deserve recognition for just showing up to work. Sometimes they even lie about their achievements or their importance. They'll pretend to know famous people just to show that they're so important and superior to all of us peasants. A worse example is that they think that they deserve a trophy for having a kid and providing it food and shelter. If the kid calls the parent out on any emotional abuse, the narcissist will come back and say, well, I put a roof over your head and food on the table, therefore you owe me. And then they might start to charge the adult child rent or something to financially handicap them into depending on the narcissistic parent and the shelter and food that's being provided. I will have more on this in future episodes. Another sign is a sense of entitlement. Because of their illusions of grandiosity, narcissists believe that they deserve special recognition and treatment for nothing. If they go on a trip, they will get offended that they didn't get bumped up to first class for just showing up at the airport. They also expect anybody within earshot to comply to their every whim. So if they say something like, oh, I have a craving for chocolate, they will literally expect somebody to produce a chocolate bar or go to the store and get them one, and then they will get mad if nobody has any chocolate on them. Another example is that they're just plain mean. Anyone who they feel threatened by, including their own children, watch out. The wrath of a narcissist is such a mentally draining thing to go through. They may feel threatened by someone who appears to have more than them or something that they want that they don't have. So they use this as an opportunity to belittle, bully, berate, or just be plain mean to that person. They will usually criticize them behind their backs because narcissists are generally cowards, but sometimes they will criticize one of their victims to their face if it gets the narcissist a reaction that they want. Narcissists live for your reaction. It is their narcissistic supply, even if it's a bad reaction. It doesn't matter to the narcissist whether the reaction is good or bad, as long as they're getting some sort of reaction from the person. Another sign is that they have no empathy and no remorse. They really don't have the capacity for empathy or remorse, and they don't feel bad about any wrongdoing of theirs. They have no conscience, no compassion, no concern about the impact of their behavior on others. Even if it's people that they're supposed to love, like their own children, their spouse, their friends, anybody. From the narc's point of view, the narcissistic abuser has an entitlement to do whatever they want to do because that's what matters to them. What they want is more important than any bond that they have with another person. So they really have this sense of entitlement that they're entitled to whatever it is that they want, including your reaction and whatever it is that they started a fight with you over. A narcissist will also have the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde persona. So 1 minute, they'll be super nice, and the next minute, they'll be horrible. And the reason that they oscillate between being a great person and somebody that I just described with all these traits, a narcissist, is because this is how they manipulate you. Once they can sense that you're catching on, that they might lose you, they might lose their narcissistic supply from you, and you're catching on that they're not a great person, they will make a complete 180, be an absolute sweetheart, start giving you compliments, start, giving you presents, things like that, in order to perpetuate the cycle again. Narcissistic abuse is a bit of a cycle. There's 4 steps to the cycle of abuse. The first step is like when tension starts building up, when there's a breakdown of communication, the victim starts being afraid and starting to, call the narcissist out on their behavior. And the second step in this cycle would be the incident. So that's when the verbal slander, the emotional abuse, the anger, the blaming, the projection, the threats, the intimidation starts. And then the third step is the reconciliation. So the abuser, the narcissist, would start apologizing, give excuses, blame the victim, things like that. And then there's a bit of a calm before the storm. So that's step number 4. The incident's forgotten. There's no abuse. There's a bit of a honeymoon phase. And all of a sudden, before you know it, we're back to step 1 when the tension starts building again. So if this is something that is part of a relationship that you have with someone where you've noticed that there's these absolute definite 4 steps of a cycle that keep repeating and repeating and repeating, that is a huge sign that you're dealing with an emotionally abusive person, a toxic person, or someone with narcissistic tendencies. There's more signs than this, but these are, in my opinion, some pretty big signs. If any of this applies to one of your relationships, then there's a great chance that that person is a narcissist. And again, they would have to show more than one of these signs on a regular, continuous basis. And the number one telltale sign would be that 4-step cycle of abuse that I described. The main thing to understand when you realize this is that you are not the crazy one. You are not going crazy. You are validly being emotionally abused, and it's not okay. And nothing that you can say to the narcissist is going to change them at all. Because if you've already tried this, how far have you gotten with getting that person to change? True change comes from within. So the narcissist will never change. Narcissists tend to never change, so don't count on it. The only thing that you can change is your reaction. In next week's episode, I will have tips on how to deal with narcissistic abuse. I will cover gray rocking, going low contact, and going no contact, and emotionally separating yourself from the narcissistic abuser, because these are all important steps on how you can start doing your own healing from this narcissistic abuse. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Feel free to make any suggestions on other episodes in the future by sending me an email at letsgetyourshiftogether@gmail.com. Feel free to check out any of my resources at www.letsgetyourshiftogether.com. We'll see you next time. Bye.